When my son-in-law told me his parents were moving into my retirement cabin, I didn't argue. I just smiled and went out to buy 20 pounds of raw meat. You see, some lessons in life can't be taught with words, only with consequences. And when you've worked 40 years to earn a little peace, you learn that silence can be louder than shouting. That day, as I loaded the meat into my truck, I wasn't losing control. I was taking it back. One quiet, calculated move at a time. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Because what happened next turned one peaceful cabin in the woods into a masterclass in poetic justice. I signed the last page with a steady hand that didn't match my heartbeat. 40 years of alarm clocks and overtime boiled down to one small cabin in the Wyoming mountains. 800 square feet, cedar logs, a green metal roof that would sing in the rain. The realtor, Dana, slid me the keys like a nurse passing a newborn. I thanked her, folded the deed into my leather folder, and walked out into the bright, high country air, feeling 10 pounds lighter and 20 years older all at once. The drive felt like washing a long road out of my bones. Pavement surrendered to gravel, gravel to dirt. Bars on my phone fell away until there was nothing left but sky and the small thrum of my engine. By the time the trees opened into my clearing, the quiet was so complete it made a sound of its own. 2 elk stood near the tree line, as if they'd been hired to welcome me. They lifted their heads, looked at me, then decided I wasn't worth the energy. Inside, the place smelled like old wood smoke and pine sap. One main room, a small bedroom, a bathroom you had to enter sideways. The kind of simple that keeps a man honest. I set my toolbox on the counter, not because I needed it, but because a man should see his tools when he starts over. I placed my coffee maker where morning light would find it first, squared a rocking chair to face the clearing, and stood listening to the cabin breathe. There's a kind of silence that cleans you. That afternoon had it. I brewed a 2-strong cup, carried it to the porch, and let the mug warm my hands while the mountain air cooled my face. For the first time in decades, there were no voices through apartment walls, no sirens in the distance, no neighbor's dog negotiating with the moon. Just wind, just the dull clink of my spoon. Just me. My phone rang. Samuel, my son-in-law, said. He never opened with hello. We've got a situation. My parents are moving in with you for a while. I watched a hawk draw a figure 8 above the ridge. With me, I said, tasting the words carefully. Into my cabin, temporarily. They lost the house. You've got space. Be a team player. This place barely fits one man and his coffee. He exhaled like I was a problem he'd been forced to manage. If you don't like it, you can always come back to Denver. I'll text you their arrival time. Friday. They'll need the keys. The line went dead. No ask, no please. Just an assumption wrapped in entitlement. I let the phone sit where it was and didn't pick it up. I've learned you can ruin a whole hour with one more sentence. Instead, I watched the hawk fold its wings and disappear behind the ridge and tried to map the exact moment peace turns to resolve. It's a small click inside a man, like a lock thrown by a careful hand. Here's the truth. I wasn't angry the way young men get angry. I've been alive long enough to know anger is a bad carpenter. It builds crooked. What I felt was smaller and sharper, like a pencil freshly shaved to a fine point. Inside, I cleared a patch of table and set down my old engineering notebook, the green, grid-lined kind I'd carried for 4 decades. The habit came back like muscle memory. Date in the top right, problem statement in the margin, a neat box where the answer would go. All my life I designed things to stand up to stress, steel, concrete, schedules, budgets. Now I was designing a boundary. I wrote the facts. New cabin. One owner, me, Ethan Ward, son-in-law. Style, control first, ask never. Frank and Martha Ward, his parents. Lost house. Unknown habits. Timeline, Friday arrival. Objective, keep my home mine without starting a war I can't finish. I sipped cold coffee and drew a rough map of the clearing. Prevailing winds, tree line, driveway curve, the angle of afternoon light. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. I was planning clarity. It would have been easy to call my daughter Lydia and pour all this into her ear. But I pictured her face, tired from teaching all day, loyal to a fault, standing in the kitchen with the phone tucked to her shoulder while she stirred something cheap for dinner, and I closed my mouth. I wasn't going to make her choose between the man she married and the man who raised her, not with words. If a choice was coming, it would arrive clothed in facts. As the light slid off the pines, I walked the boundary of my little kingdom. Boots through dry needles, a soft crunch every third step. I checked the lock on the shed, tested the porch rail with a slow lean, counted outlets in my head for a generator I might buy when winter made its arguments. None of this was about Ethan yet. It was about me reminding myself whose name was on the deed. Back inside, I warmed what remained of the coffee and held the cup under my nose the way a man inhales a memory. 40 years of work had one job now: keep a roof over the last good years. I looked down at the sentence I had boxed on the page. Answer: apply consequence, not conflict. People like Ethan live on conflict. It feeds them. They win even when they lose because they've dragged you into their weather. Consequence is different. It's the ground you stand on when the storm finally passes. My phone lit up with a text. Lydia, a photo of my cabin keys in my palm from earlier that day, the caption, "Proud of you, Dad. You earned this." I let the words sit where they landed. She didn't know there was already a hand reaching for the doorknob that wasn't hers. I wrote one more line. Rule: do not explain a boundary to someone who profits from misunderstanding it. Outside, the first stars pressed through the dark, like nails tapped from the other side of the sky. I shut off the lights and watched the cabin hold its shape in the blue. I could hear my heart steadying to the rhythm of the place. That's when the idea arrived, simple, clean, almost polite in the way it knocked. I didn't grin. Men my age don't look good grinning alone in the dark. I just closed the notebook, slid the pencil under the wire, and set the keys beside it. Tomorrow I'd drive into town, ask a few questions that would sound like a city man trying to learn rural ways. Come home with what I needed. You can tell a lot about a person by how they approach a locked gate. Some shake it and shout. Some look for the hinge. I've always preferred to study the hinge. I went to bed without checking if the door was bolted. The mountains don't care if you sleep. They just hold you at the edge of yourself until you do. I lay there listening to the cabin creak into the cold and thought about how men like Ethan count on you to lose your temper. They make a living off it. I wasn't going to give him a paycheck. In the morning, I'd have coffee with the sunrise and then take a drive. Not far, just enough to talk with someone who knows which animals belong to which smells. Enough to learn what draws a line between a house and the wild, and how easy it is to blur that line if you're careless. Before I closed my eyes, I reached for the notebook and added a final note in the margin. Small enough that only I could have written it. Peace is a structure. Build it to code. I woke up before sunrise the next morning, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and sat by the window watching fog settle between the trees. I wasn't angry, I was thinking. There's a difference. I'd learned long ago that when people underestimate you, it's best not to correct them. Let them think they're winning. It gives you time to plan, and that's exactly what I did. I grabbed my notebook, the same one I used to draw bridge designs back in my working days, and wrote 2 words at the top of the page. Field research. If Ethan's parents were really coming to live in my cabin, then they were about to learn that the mountains have their own rules. Later that morning, I drove into town, a small cluster of wooden buildings, 1 gas pump, and a ranger station with a faded sign that read, Wildlife Services. Inside, a ranger in his 50s looked up from his desk and smiled. Morning, I said. Just bought a cabin out by County Road 14. Thought I'd ask a few things before I accidentally invite the wrong kind of neighbor. He chuckled. You'll be fine if you keep your food locked up. Bears are sloppy, but wolves, they're smart. Don't leave meat out, or you'll have company. Wolves, I repeated, pretending to sound nervous. How close do they come? He shrugged. Close enough, but they don't bother folks unless you feed them. I thanked him and left with a pamphlet titled "Living Safely Among Predators." The irony wasn't lost on me. Next, I stopped by the butcher's shop. The man behind the counter was cutting steaks so thick they looked like doorstops. "Need some scraps?" I asked. "How much you want?" "About 20 pounds. He blinked once, then wrapped the meat in brown paper without a question. I paid cash. By the time I got back to the cabin, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snowmelt. I left the truck running, took the bundles of raw meat out, and walked about 30 yards into the clearing behind the cabin. There's something peaceful about the woods when you move quietly, when every step has purpose. I placed the meat in 3 small piles upwind from the porch. I wasn't setting a trap. I wasn't breaking any laws. I was just letting nature remind people where they stood on the food chain. When I went back inside, I washed my hands in cold water until they stung, then made another cup of coffee. The cabin was still and quiet again, exactly how I liked it. That night, I slept like a man who had finally taken back control. The next afternoon, while I was in Denver, my phone buzzed. It was an alert from the motion detector app connected to the cabin's security feed. I opened it, curious. On the screen, I saw a car creeping up my gravel driveway. Ethan's parents. Frank climbed out first, squinting around like he was inspecting a rental. Martha followed, holding her purse tight against her chest, as if the trees might rob her. "This is where he lives?" she said. "Smells like dirt." They didn't notice what was happening behind them. Not yet. From the trees, 3 grey shapes appeared, moving slow and sure. Wolves. Real ones. They weren't attacking, just investigating the smell of fresh meat. Frank turned, froze. His voice cracked. "Martha!" "Get in the car," she screamed. They ran. The engine roared to life, tires spinning, gravel flying. In seconds they were gone. Nothing left but the echo of panic. And the wolves. They didn't care. They just kept doing what wolves do. I set the phone down and laughed softly. Not out of cruelty, but relief. For once, the wilderness had handled my problem without me lifting a finger. 20 minutes later, Ethan called. His voice came through sharp and furious. "What did you do?" "My parents were almost attacked." "Almost?" I said. "Then they're fine. You baited wolves. You could have gotten someone killed." "I didn't bait anything, Ethan. I bought a cabin in wolf country. The wolves were here long before I was." He tried to control the conversation, but for once his words sounded smaller than mine. "You're crazy," he hissed. "This isn't over," I smiled. "You're right." "It's not." When he hung up, I leaned back and stared out the window. Denver felt smaller than ever. Everything about the city, the noise, the pretending, the constant need to explain yourself, seemed childish now. I reached for my notebook and wrote, "Test 1. Boundaries functional. Wolves effective." Then I underlined the word effective twice. I wasn't planning to hurt anyone. I just wanted to make one thing perfectly clear. In this story, I wasn't the prey, and that was the moment I realized I didn't have to raise my voice to take back my life. I just had to let nature remind people what happens when you try to claim territory that isn't yours. Because out here, even the silence has teeth. 3 days passed before I heard from Lydia. Her voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when someone's already been filled with someone else's story. "Dad," she said, "Ethan told me what happened at the cabin. He said you scared his parents with wolves." I didn't answer right away. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the old one, that still had a burn mark from where she'd set down a curling iron as a teenager. I could still hear the echo of her laughter from those days. "Lydia," I said slowly, "the cabin is in the woods." "Wolves live in the woods." "I didn't scare anyone. Nature did." She sighed, and that sigh was heavier than the words that followed. "He's just worried, Dad. He thinks you're not coping well alone." There it was. The first stone thrown, not from malice but from manipulation. "Your husband's worried about my mental health?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Please don't be defensive," she said. "He just thinks maybe you need help managing things. Maybe you shouldn't be living out there by yourself." I almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. I'd built highways and bridges that were still standing 40 years later, but now, suddenly, I wasn't capable of living in a 1-bedroom cabin. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I told her. "You just remember, people who want power will often use the word help to get it." She didn't answer. I could almost hear Ethan's shadow standing behind her, feeding her lines. That night, I started receiving calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. "Hey Sam, you okay out there? Heard you had a wildlife problem. Maybe it's time to move closer to family." Ethan was working fast. He wasn't just trying to control my property, he was trying to rewrite my reputation. I spent the next morning making notes. Old engineer style, cause and effect, patterns, behaviors. Objective: stop Ethan from gaining legal access. Risk: manipulation through mental incompetence narrative. Solution: lock down all assets. That's when I called Alan Pierce. He was a friend of a friend, a lawyer who specialized in elder law and estate protection. He picked up on the second ring. "Alan Pierce speaking." "Mr. Pierce," I said, "my name's Samuel Hale. I believe someone's trying to set me up for a guardianship scam." There was a pause. Then he said, "Tell me everything," so I did. From Ethan's phone call to the rumors to Lydia's worried tone. Alan didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he said, "You're smart to get ahead of this. Here's what they do. They paint you as unstable, report you to Adult Protective Services, and when the state intervenes, they petition for conservatorship. Suddenly your property, bank accounts, everything is in their hands. Seen it 100 times. I felt my pulse steady. How do we stop it?" He replied, "We don't fight, we fortify. Transfer everything you own into a revocable living trust. That way, even if they try to get control, there's nothing for them to take." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Let's start today." Over the next few days, Alan drew up documents while I gathered papers, deeds, insurance, titles. I signed every line, dated every signature, and made copies of everything. The cabin, my savings, my accounts, all secured in a trust that only I could manage. I remember feeling oddly calm, even as I realized my own family was positioning against me. Maybe it's because when you've seen storms for long enough, you stop fearing the thunder. That evening, Lydia called again, her voice tighter this time. "Dad, Ethan says you're doing some legal things behind our backs. He's worried you're being influenced by someone." "Influenced?" I repeated. "You mean by a lawyer?" She hesitated. "He just wants to make sure you're not being taken advantage of." I smiled to myself. The irony was almost poetic. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "you know I love you. But if a man ever tells you he's protecting you while he's reaching for something that isn't his, that's not love. That's control." She started to cry softly, but I could tell it wasn't for me. It was for the truth starting to dawn. When we hung up, I sat in silence, thinking of the years I'd spent working to make her life easier, and how one man's greed was trying to erase all of it. The next morning, I got a voicemail from Ethan himself. "You've made a big mistake, old man. If you think paperwork can stop me, you don't know how this game works." I saved that message. Twice. Alan laughed when I played it for him. "Perfect," he said. "That's evidence of intent. Keep it." I asked him if I should be worried. He said, "Worried? No, you're not the one panicking. For the first time since this started, I slept well. I'd stopped reacting and started recording, stopped explaining myself and started preparing. In the morning, I wrote in my notebook, when people start calling you crazy, it usually means you're finally thinking clearly, just not in their favor. I underlined it twice. Ethan thought he was building a case against me. But really, he was building one for me, and he didn't even know it yet. I was sipping coffee on my porch the following Thursday when the phone rang again. Lydia. This time her voice sounded different, softer, like someone who had been arguing too long. "Dad, I don't know what to do anymore." "What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. There was a long pause. "Ethan's parents, they're fighting with him. His dad borrowed money from a friend, lost it gambling, and now they're behind on their rent. He's been so angry lately. He says if you'd just let them stay at your cabin, none of this would be happening." I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence do the thinking for me. Then she whispered, "Dad, did you know they owe almost $50,000? I hadn't known. But in that moment, everything started clicking into place. The entitlement, the pressure, the sudden rush to get control of my property. Ethan wasn't trying to protect me. He was trying to protect his father's debts. I see, I said quietly. And how's your mortgage doing, Lydia? Fine, I think. Ethan takes care of the bills. Those words froze in the air like frost. Ethan takes care of the bills. The same man who thought he could outsmart a retired engineer with a single phone call. After we hung up, I called Alan. I think we've found his motive. Alan's tone sharpened. If he's that deep in debt, he's dangerous. Let's dig, quietly. He had a private investigator on his payroll, a woman named Dana, sharp as a scalpel and twice as precise. Within a week, she sent over a small folder with neatly labeled pages. I'll never forget the first document, home equity line of credit, $35,000. The borrower's name, Ethan Ward, the co-signer, Lydia Ward, and the kicker? Lydia's signature didn't match. Alan looked up from the papers. This is fraud, Samuel. Classic desperation move. He's borrowed against her home without her full consent. Probably forged it. I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't about property anymore. This was about my daughter's future. How bad is it? I asked. 3 missed payments? The bank's preparing foreclosure proceedings. If they lose that house, he's done. That's why he's coming for yours. I rubbed my face, the weight of it all settling like mountain fog. Alan leaned back. You know, there's a way to make this right and make sure he never touches you again. I looked at him carefully. I'm listening. He explained it in plain English. You buy the debt quietly through a holding company. If you own the note, the bank reports to you. You don't need permission from Ethan, and he doesn't even have to know. When he tries to leverage anything else, you'll already own his leash. I almost laughed. That's poetic, Alan smiled faintly. No, Samuel. That's justice with interest. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the cabin's small floor back and forth, the wood creaking under my steps. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and somewhere in the distance I heard a coyote cry, sharp and brief. The wilderness didn't need approval to survive. It just did. The next morning I called Alan. Do it, I said. Buy the loan. All of it. 2 weeks later, the deal was done. On paper, Summit Holdings LLC, a small, faceless entity, became the new creditor of Ethan Ward's home loan. In reality, Summit Holdings was me. I remember standing at the mailbox with the official confirmation letter in my hand, feeling the cold Wyoming wind against my skin. I smiled, not with joy, but with clarity. For months, Ethan had been building a story where he was the hero saving the family from a delusional old man. Now, without even realizing it, he'd handed me the keys to his entire kingdom. Later that week, he called again, trying to sound casual. Lydia says you've been talking to lawyers. You think that's smart? Smart enough, I said. He snorted. You can't protect that cabin forever, Samuel. Sooner or later, people need family. Family? I said quietly. Then maybe you should start acting like one. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. You think you've won, old man? You've just made enemies. Ethan, I said calmly, enemies are easy to make, but they're even easier to own. He hung up again, and for the first time, I didn't feel a single tremor of fear, because I knew what he didn't. He no longer had control of my daughter's future, or his own. That night, I sat on my porch, the same place where it had all started, and wrote one last note in my book. Step 2, control the narrative. Step 3, control the debt. Step 4, wait. I closed the notebook, leaned back, and listened to the forest breathing around me. Somewhere out there, wolves moved silently through the trees, calm, patient, waiting for their moment. I understood them completely. It was a Sunday morning when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked out the cabin window and saw Lydia's silver sedan parked halfway up the drive. My first thought wasn't surprise. It was relief. Finally, she'd come on her own. No Ethan, no phone filters. Just her. I met her at the door before she could even knock. Her face looked pale, like someone who'd been living under fluorescent light too long. Her eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from realizing the truth in small, painful pieces. Dad, she said softly. Can I come in? Always. Inside, she glanced around like she hadn't seen the place before. The small kitchen, the pine walls, the worn leather chair. Her eyes stopped at my notebook on the table, open to a page that said, "Truth requires proof." She sat down, folded her hands, and took a deep breath. "Ethan said you were planning to sue him, that you're trying to destroy our marriage." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I went to the counter and picked up a thin manila folder, the one Alan had labeled Ward, Financial Summary. I slid it across the table. "What's this?" she asked. "Proof," I said. "Not gossip, not opinions, just truth." She hesitated before opening it. The first page stopped her cold. The forged signature on the home equity loan. Her name copied but not hers. Then the second page, a record of missed payments. The third, a transaction showing Ethan transferring money to his father 2 days before the foreclosure notice. Her lips parted but no words came out. I spoke quietly, because volume ruins truth. "He didn't just lie to me, Lydia. He lied to you. He risked your home, your credit, your future, just to cover his father's gambling." She shook her head. "No, there has to be some mistake." I reached for my phone and played the voicemail Ethan had left, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You think paperwork can stop me, old man?" When the recording ended, she stared at the table for a long time. Then, like someone breaking through ice, she whispered, "Oh my God." Her voice trembled. "He told me you were being manipulated, that you were confused." "Confused?" I said softly. "The only confusion here is why a man who claims to love you would sign your name without your permission." Tears filled her eyes, and she covered her face with her hands. "I don't understand why he'd do this." "Because he could," I said. "Because he thought you'd never question him. Because people like Ethan don't love, they manage. And when management fails, they manipulate." She looked up, her eyes red. "What do I do now?" I took her hand. The same hand I'd held when she learned to cross the street. "You decide who you trust, and if you can't decide right now, that's okay. Just don't ignore what's in front of you." She wiped her face, but her voice grew firmer. "He always told me you were controlling, that you wanted to handle my money, that you didn't think I could make good decisions." I smiled sadly. "That's how it works. They take your strengths, your kindness, your loyalty, and tell you those are weaknesses. It keeps you doubting yourself so they can control the story." Lydia nodded slowly, a kind of weary clarity washing over her. Then she said the sentence that hit me hardest. "I thought I married a man. Turns out I married a problem I didn't see coming." We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the wind pressing against the windows, gentle but constant, like the mountain breathing. Finally, she spoke again. "You've been patient, haven't you?" I nodded. "You can't outshout a liar. You just wait for the silence after the lie collapses." She exhaled, shaky but determined. "I think I'm done waiting." I didn't tell her what to do next. I didn't have to. Some choices right themselves once truth fills the room. Before she left, she hugged me, a long, tight hug that said more than words could. I could feel the weight she'd been carrying start to shift. As she stepped outside, I said quietly, "Lydia, remember this. Peace isn't avoiding storms. It's knowing who stands beside you when they come." She turned, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Dad." When her car disappeared down the road, I walked back inside and sat by the table. The folder lay open, its papers spread like fallen leaves. I picked up my pencil and wrote in my notebook, "Step 5. The moment you stop defending yourself and start revealing truth. That's when the tide turns." Then I closed the notebook, leaned back and whispered to the empty cabin, "She knows now, Ethan, and that's all it takes." The wolves howled somewhere in the distance that night, long and low, carrying across the hills. I listened to them the way a man listens to justice, arriving in a language only the wilderness understands, because the trap was already set, and Ethan didn't even know he'd stepped into it. A week after Lydia's visit, I sat at my cabin table with a cup of coffee and my notebook open to a blank page. The air outside was cold enough to make the windows sweat, and a blue jay kept tapping against the railing. impatient for crumbs I didn't have. I had spent 40 years solving problems with pencil lines and numbers. But this one needed something more subtle, paperwork and patience. Alan called that morning. She came to see you? Yes, I said. She saw everything. She knows. He paused, then said, Good. That means it's time to spring the trap. He told me exactly what to do, one final move that would decide everything. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just clean. That evening I sent Ethan a letter through certified mail. Inside was a single-page offer written in plain language. It said, if Lydia files for divorce, I will forgive the entire mortgage debt under Summit Holdings LLC. If not, foreclosure proceedings will begin within 14 days. It wasn't a threat. It was math. Clear, fair, and cold as steel. The letter was dated, signed, and delivered. 2 days later my phone rang. Are you insane? Ethan's voice cracked with panic. You think you can play banker now? You can't do this! I already did, I said quietly. You see, I don't believe in threats. I believe in balance. You can't just buy someone's loan. Apparently I can. And I did. Your debt belongs to me now. He went silent for a moment. I could almost hear him trying to calculate his next lie, but there was no math left to save him. You're bluffing, he said finally. Check your mail. Then I hung up. That same night Lydia called. Her voice was steady. Daddy got your letter. And? He's furious. Said you're blackmailing him. What did you say? I told him you don't bluff. I smiled into the receiver. Good girl! Alan handled the rest. Every call, every response went through him. I didn't need to yell or argue. I just waited. The mountain taught me that patience is stronger than force. Days passed. Lydia didn't come by, but I could tell something was changing. The calls from Ethan stopped. The gossip from relatives faded. Silence, the kind I'd earned, began to settle again. Then one Friday afternoon, Alan called. It's done, he said. What's done? Lydia filed. The papers are in motion. He'll sign, or he'll lose everything. Either way, you win. I didn't celebrate. I just looked out the window, watching snowflakes fall through the pine branches, and felt the smallest exhale of peace. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed again. Ethan. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was thick, slurred, the sound of a man losing the ground beneath him. You think you won, old man? You think you destroyed me? No, I said. I didn't destroy you. You did that all by yourself. You turned my wife against me. No, I replied. I showed her the truth. What she did with it was her choice. He laughed bitterly, a sound without humor. You're gonna die out there alone, you know that? Maybe, I said, but at least I'll die free. He hung up again. The next morning, Alan emailed me a final document, a copy of the settlement agreement. Ethan had signed it. He waived all claims to Lydia's property, assets, and my estate. In exchange, the debt was cleared. Clean slate, legal and binding. I sat at my table, reading the signature over and over again. His name scrawled carelessly at the bottom, like a man signing away his own story. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and soundless. Lydia called that evening. Her voice was calm, lighter than I'd heard in months. It's over, she said. Yes, I replied. It is. He left the house this morning. It took a suitcase and nothing else. I nodded to myself. Then you can start living again, she hesitated. Dad, do you forgive him? I thought about that for a moment. Forgiveness is like fire, I said. It has its uses, but you don't hand it to someone who still smells of gasoline. She laughed through her tears. That sounds like something you'd write in your notebook. It's already in there, I told her. That night, I poured myself a small glass of whiskey and stepped outside. The forest was covered in white, and the sky was clear enough to see every star. The world felt balanced again, not perfect but steady. I didn't feel joy exactly, more like quiet justice. The kind you don't brag about because it doesn't need applause. Before going inside, I wrote one final note on the page. Step 6. Don't chase revenge. Build it, wait for it, and let it arrive on its own terms. I closed the notebook and blew out the lamp. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. one long, steady note across the frozen valley. It didn't sound like anger. It sounded like acknowledgement, and I understood, because like the wolves, I hadn't attacked. I had simply reminded everyone that peace, when cornered, still has teeth. The snow began to melt in late March, and the first signs of spring returned to the mountains. Thawing streams, wet earth, and that faint green smell of life trying again. I thought the season might finally bring quiet, but life has a way of tying loose ends for you if you've got enough patience to let it. Alan called one morning, his voice brisk. "Remember how Ethan's parents were using your cabin address? Turns out they've been collecting federal benefits off it." I stopped mid-sip. "Benefits?" "Social assistance, false residency claims, mail forwarding. We traced 3 checks sent to your address over the last month." "It's fraud, Samuel." I didn't say anything for a while. It wasn't surprise, it was recognition. Frank and Martha had been parasites so long they probably forgot what sunlight felt like. Alan continued, "I'll hand it to the state attorney. You won't have to testify. Just verify the address and let the paperwork do the talking." That was the thing about paperwork. It always tells the truth eventually. Weeks passed. I focused on fixing small things around the cabin. A squeaky hinge, a loose board on the porch, small jobs that make you feel steady. Every so often I'd get updates from Alan. The investigation had opened. Statements taken. The evidence was clean. In early May he called again. "They're being charged, Samuel. Mail fraud and false benefits claim. Plea deals on the table. Will they serve time? Unlikely. They'll get probation and restitution, but their names will sit in public record forever. That's justice, the quiet kind." I thanked him, then sat by the window for a long time, watching the clouds drift over the peaks. I wasn't happy. Happiness wasn't the right word. It was something closer to completion, like watching a long equation finally balance itself. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove into town, parked outside the courthouse, and walked through the side doors like any other old man running an errand. The courtroom was small, fluorescent lights buzzing, wooden benches polished smooth by decades of waiting. Frank sat at the defense table, shoulders slumped, his hands folded like he was praying for a past he'd already burned. Martha sat beside him, face pale and tight. The judge read through the charges with the tired rhythm of someone who'd said these words 100 times. Before, defendants have agreed to restitution and a 5-year probation period, the clerk read. When the judge asked if anyone wished to speak, Frank shook his head. His voice cracked as he said, "No, Your Honor." The gavel came down once. The sound was light, almost gentle, yet it echoed through the room like a door closing for good. I didn't stand up or make eye contact. I didn't need to. As they turned to leave, Frank's eyes met mine for a split second. He froze, recognition flickering like a failing bulb. I nodded once, not in triumph, just acknowledgement. Outside, the air was warm, almost forgiving. I sat on the courthouse steps, feeling the sun against my face. The whole thing lasted less than 15 minutes, but it took years of quiet endurance to get there. Alan joined me outside, carrying his briefcase like it weighed nothing. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I didn't expect satisfaction to sound like silence," he chuckled. "That's usually what it sounds like when it's done right." We shook hands, and he went back inside. I drove home slow, stopping once at a roadside diner for pie and black coffee. The waitress called me Hun and told me to take my time. I did. For the first time in months, I wasn't rushing to protect, prove, or plan. I was just existing. When I finally reached the cabin, the sun was dipping low, painting the hills orange. I stood on the porch with my coffee and listened to the forest settling down for the night. Somewhere out in the distance, a coyote barked once. It had been quiet. I opened my notebook and wrote the last line for the day. Step 7, when justice arrives. Don't gloat. Listen. The world hums differently when balance is restored. I closed it, slid the pencil into the spine, and leaned back in my chair. I didn't feel like a man who'd won a war. I felt like a man who'd rebuilt a house that others had tried to burn, and maybe that's all justice ever is. Not vengeance, not noise, but repair. The wolves were still out there somewhere in the hills. I could feel it. Not enemies, not symbols, just part of the same world trying to keep its order. And for the first time since this began, I felt part of that order again. When the dust finally settled, it was summer again. The snow was gone, the trails were dry, and the mountain air smelled of pine and rain. For the first time in what felt like years, I woke without that old knot of tension sitting behind my ribs. Peace feels strange when you've been fighting too long. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It slips in quietly, like a guest who lets themselves in because the door was already open. Lydia called one morning in June. Her voice was lighter, not healed, but healing. "Dad," she said, "I found a small house about 15 minutes from you. 2 bedrooms, a garden. Nothing fancy, but it feels right. You'll love it," I told her. "Close enough for dinner, far enough for thinking," she laughed softly. It was the first laugh I'd heard from her that didn't sound rehearsed. A week later, she came by to help me paint the porch. We worked in comfortable silence, brushing long strokes of warm brown onto the wood, while the radio hummed quietly in the background. The scent of fresh paint and sun-baked pine filled the air. Every now and then, she'd look at me like she was still trying to understand how everything had turned out the way it did. Finally, she said, "I don't think I ever thanked you." I shook my head. "You don't have to." "I do," she insisted. "If you hadn't stopped him, I don't even know where I'd be." I leaned against the railing. "You'd still be you, maybe a little more bruised, but still standing. You're tougher than you think." She smiled, but it faded quickly. "I feel broken sometimes, Dad. Like part of me still believes his version of things." I set my brush down and looked her in the eye. "That's how manipulation works. It leaves echoes. You'll stop hearing them when you stop listening for them." She nodded slowly. Then she said something that nearly broke me. "I thought you'd be angry with me for believing him." I sighed. "You're my daughter. You loved him. You trusted him. That's not something to be ashamed of. It just means you still believe people can be good. Don't lose that, Lydia. Just aim it better next time." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "You always make it sound simple." "Simple," I said, "doesn't mean easy." We finished painting as the sun dipped behind the ridge, turning everything gold. She packed up her things, kissed my cheek, and promised to come back Sunday for dinner. After she drove off, I sat on the porch a while longer, the brush still in my hand. For months, I'd been building defenses, paperwork, boundaries, strategies. Now I was building something else, peace. Later that week, she invited me over to see her new place. Small, cozy, with mismatched furniture and a lemon tree by the window. She'd hung a wind chime near the door. It sang every time the breeze passed. We made dinner together, simple food, roasted vegetables and black coffee. No tension, no guarded silences. Just the rhythm of 2 people remembering how to be family. Afterward, she said, "I've started seeing a counselor. Just talking, trying to understand why I stayed so long." I smiled. Talking helps. I built bridges for a living. But the hardest one I ever learned to build was between what I felt and what I said. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You were right about everything, Dad." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. I was just patient. You were the brave one." That night when I got home, I sat outside again, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wolves were silent now. Just the hum of crickets, the rustle of leaves. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Step 8. When revenge is over, remember to rebuild. Don't live in the fire you lit. Use its warmth to see who you've saved." I closed the book and looked toward the distant hills. Somewhere out there, the same wild creatures that had once terrified my uninvited guests still roamed freely, unbothered, balanced, alive. So was I. It was late autumn when I saw them again, 3 wolves standing at the edge of the clearing, exactly where it had all started. The morning light cut through the mist, turning their coats silver. They didn't move toward me, and I didn't move toward them. We just stood there, separated by 20 yards of space and a year's worth of transformation. Funny thing, I wasn't afraid. Not like before. Maybe because I finally understood them. Wolves don't destroy for pleasure. They restore balance. They take what's diseased, what's weak, what doesn't belong, and in doing so, the forest survives. That morning, the mountain felt different. Not dangerous, not wild, just honest. Everything out here existed because it respected boundaries. I poured myself a cup of coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and watched them. One of them lifted its head, met my gaze, and held it, not like a challenge, but like a recognition. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth between us. Then, as quietly as they'd come, they turned and disappeared back into the trees, and that's when it hit me. All this time, I thought I'd been teaching Ethan a lesson, but maybe the lesson had been mine all along. You can't keep peace by surrendering it to people who thrive on chaos. You keep peace by defending it quietly, consistently, without apology. That realization felt heavier than satisfaction, heavier but cleaner. A week later, Lydia came up for dinner. She brought homemade soup and a new picture for my wall, a framed photograph of a mountain ridge at sunrise. She said, "Every time I look at this, I remember what you told me, that peace isn't avoiding storms, it's standing through them." I smiled. Then we've both learned something. We ate together, laughed, talked about small things, her new job, her garden, the neighbor who kept stealing her lemons by accident. Ordinary conversations. That's the kind of victory most people forget to count. When she left, she stood by her car and looked toward the woods. "Do you ever get lonely out here, Dad?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "Lonely's when you're surrounded by the wrong people." I gestured to the trees, the mountains, the quiet. "This is peace," she nodded. "I'm glad you never gave it up." After she drove away, I sat on the porch as night fell. The forest was alive with sound. Owls, wind, the creak of trees. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard another low howl, rising and fading into the cold. Not a warning, a greeting. I opened my notebook and wrote one final line for the day. Step 9. The same world that tests you will sometimes thank you, not in words, but in silence. Listen for it. I closed the book and stared into the dark, letting the stillness settle over me. The wolves were gone, but their lesson lingered. Protect your territory. Stand quietly. Never let anyone mistake your kindness for surrender. The next morning, I built a small wooden sign near the edge of my property. Nothing dramatic, just carved words that said private land. Respect the quiet. I planted it firmly in the ground, stepped back and smiled. Not because it warned anyone, but because it reminded me of everything I'd fought for. That evening, I watched the sun drop behind the hills and realized something simple but true. Revenge had never been the goal. What I really wanted was peace that couldn't be stolen, and now I had it. So I raised my cup of coffee toward the forest, toward the place where the wolves had stood, and whispered, "Thank you for showing me how to survive without losing myself." The mountain didn't answer, but it didn't need to. It had already spoken in the only language that matters, balance restored. I've been told that every story needs an ending, but life doesn't always end neatly. Sometimes it just quiets down, like a fire that's done its job and chooses to rest. That's where I am now, sitting here at my kitchen table in this cabin, the same place where all of this began, with my old notebook open and a single cup of coffee cooling beside me. The forest outside hums low and calm. No fear, no threats, just balance. When I first moved here, I thought this cabin was going to be a reward, a quiet ending to a life of work. But it turned out to be something else entirely, a classroom. These walls, these woods, even those wolves, they taught me more about human nature than any city ever did. You see, betrayal doesn't start with shouting or broken glass. It starts quietly, with one small assumption. One line crossed just this once, one favor that turns into an expectation. That's how control begins. Ethan thought he was clever. That because I was old, I was harmless. That because I stayed quiet, I was weak. What he never understood is that silence isn't surrender, it's observation. And when you spend your life watching bridges bend under pressure, you learn exactly when something's about to break. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did. The truth? Not for a second. Because I didn't destroy anyone. I simply let consequences catch up to their rightful owners. I didn't need to scream or fight or beg. I just let the truth breathe long enough to expose the rot, and that's the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is about anger. Justice is about restoration. That's what I built here. Not a trap, not a punishment. A restoration. Lydia visits every weekend now. Sometimes she brings groceries, sometimes flowers, sometimes nothing at all except her laughter. And every time she leaves, she hugs me a little longer. That's how I know the healing is real. It shows up quietly, just like peace did. She told me once, "Dad, you always plan things 3 steps ahead." I laughed. That's because I've lived long enough to know that life always makes its next move when you stop paying attention. I think that's what kept me alive through all of this. Not bitterness, not vengeance, just awareness. A few weeks ago, she told me Ethan moved to another state. He's working odd jobs now, trying to rebuild his life. I don't wish him harm, truly. I hope he learns something useful from all of this. Maybe one day he'll realize that when you lie for too long, truth starts following you, like a shadow you can't shake. As for his parents, I heard they moved into a small apartment near the edge of town. The kind where the rent's cheap and the neighbors keep to themselves. Maybe that's their own version of peace. Everyone gets what they earn, one way or another. I've learned that the older you get, the quieter justice becomes. It stops being about proving you were right and starts being about living right. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint howl of a wolf echoing through the valley. It doesn't scare me. If anything, it comforts me, because it reminds me that the wild is still honest, that there's still something out there that knows how to defend what's sacred. I take another sip of coffee, open my notebook one last time and write. Step 10. Forgiveness is not letting them off the hook. It's letting yourself move on while they stay tangled in their own rope. I underline it twice, then close the notebook for good. The pages are filled, a record of one man's quiet war and the lessons that came from it. Before I end this story, there's something I want to say to anyone listening, especially those who've been made to feel small, invisible, or powerless. You are not weak because you're quiet. You're not foolish because you trusted. And you're not finished just because someone tried to take what's yours. Stand your ground. Don't shout. Don't beg. Just know your worth and act accordingly, because peace, real peace, isn't a gift someone gives you. It's something you defend. One boundary, one truth, one choice at a time. When I step outside now, the air smells like cedar and rain. The mountains rise silent and strong. And I realize the revenge is long over, but the peace I built, that's forever. I glance toward the tree line one last time, smile faintly, and whisper, "Thank you for listening." And wherever you are, protect your quiet. The wind moves through the pines like a low, steady breath. The world holds its rhythm. And for the first time in my life, I don't just feel safe, I feel free.